Chapter 4 has the abilities and specialties you can choose as a character. Most abilities range from 1 to 7 ranks. If there is a number associated with a capital B, that is the number of bonus dice you have. Specialties can be added to passive test results. Let's say someone was trying to sneak past someone else. It would be a stealth versus awareness. If they had awareness of 4, 4 ranks in that ability, their passive result would be 16. That's the difficulty or target number that would be needed to try to sneak past them. If you would have 2 specialties in awareness, your passive result would be up to 18. There are 19 abilities and various ways to use each one. They're kind of vague, and that's kind of a good thing. They're more all-encompassing than, say, a system that has lots of different skills. Think of them as like bucket skills or stats, and that should be a good way to keep them in your head. Each ability has some specialties listed, but GMs are told and suggested to come up with more if they think they'll fit the game. Chapter 5 is the Destiny Points and Qualities section. And under the qualities, you basically can have your benefits and drawbacks. You can spend Destiny Points, burn them, or you can invest them and essentially buy your qualities or your benefits. Benefits are pretty much like D20 feats with some prerequisites. And with this section, it starts to become apparent that there might be too many terms, too many ways of describing parts, the mechanical parts of this game, because you're like, okay, benefits and qualities, are they different things? Are they the same thing? And there are things in some parts of the book where you need to reference them in other parts. So it probably could have been organized slightly better, or they could have used less terms to make it less confusing. That's just one thing I noticed when I got to this chapter. The benefits are broken down into ability, fate, heritage, martial, and social qualities. And drawbacks. These are also called qualities, so there might be some confusion there. You can take one of these drawbacks to get 1 extra destiny point. You can't have more drawbacks than you do benefits, however. There are lots of benefits and drawbacks to choose from. And if you're a kind of player that likes feats, likes the D20 feats, I think this will be an area where you really like this game. There's lots to choose from, and I think depending on which one you choose, you really can make a unique character. Chapter 6 deals with creating your house and the lands that you rule. Now remember, the base assumption for this game is that every one of the player characters belong to the same minor house. So the idea is that you should sit down and make the house and your characters probably in the first night of a campaign if you want to do this. And remember that you do not have to make your own house. There is one default house provided, but especially as a GM, it might be fun to go through and delineate the different houses, what powers they have, what their different resources are. There is a campaign guide that you can buy outside of this book that goes through and does that for a lot of the houses, but if you don't buy that, you have to do it yourself. It's a pretty beefy section of the book that can be a little intimidating. You can choose all kinds of details for your house. Once you understand the ins and outs of it, it's a pretty involved house creation system with different steps, but if you follow along with the steps, it's pretty easy. You just have to put in the work. And you need some free time on your hands. It does take a little while to create a house. I found it to be quite enjoyable to make them from scratch. There's an element of rolling on random charts, so that if it's not just all picking and choosing, there's a little bit of luck involved. And I always like random charts. It just seems to make it more fun for me. You could use this section of the book to help flesh out your own settings with houses. If you wanted to have some sort of sci-fi setting even, go through and make houses like this. Or, when I think of houses, I always think of Dune with the house Atreides and so forth. So that's a little bit of that flavor, I think, is in, this book. There are various stages for making your own house from scratch. The first step is the realm. You have to determine which of the major areas of Westeros your house belongs to, such as King's Landing, Dragonstone, the North, the Ironlands, the Riverlands, Mountains of the Moon, Westerlands, the Reach, Stormlands, or Dorne. Once you decide which realm you're from, that really hammers out your starting resources. And resources is a way that describes your house. Second step is starting resources, and there are 7 of them. Defense, influence, lands, law, population, power, and wealth. And depending on which realm you picked in the first step, greatly affects how much of each of these resources you start out with. Each player can modify these slightly, and examples in the book show you step by step how they made the example default house that's in the book. Each resource is rated from 0 to 70, so there's a great range that you can have, and there are several charts talking about each resource and what the numbers mean. So obviously having 70s in every single resource would be perfect, ideal, but you're not going to have that at all. So be prepared. Some of the houses that I generated from, they're very interesting and fleshed out, and they feel real. So that's one good thing about this system. Again, it takes a little bit of time. You have to have a little bit of patience, but I think it's very well worth it in the end. Step 3 is the house history. It talks about when your house was founded and what and how many historical events have happened since then. It is a nice mix of positive and negative historical events. You can pick these, but I think it's a lot more interesting to do them randomly. Because obviously if you pick things, you're only going to pick the good things. Well, I guess maybe not everyone, but most people. The house that I made up from scratch had nothing but doom and gloom and decline, and my house started out great, and then it just went straight into the shitter, which felt very Westeros to me. I don't know. Again, there's a nice mix of positive and negative things, so depending on how you roll, can really greatly affect your boons and your flaws that you have for your house. You can interpret these events. You have a little bit of license to interpret them. And again, depending on what your GM says, he might make them not as harsh or make them a little bit easier. Just talk to your GM as you're making your house to see what he thinks or she thinks. These results that you roll up randomly are just basically to flesh out your house and give a little bit of history. And when you think about the major houses in the novels, each one is supposed to have this house is really honorable. This house, Lannisters always pay their debts, and you never want to stab them in the back because then they'll hunt you down and destroy you, things like that. So what's nice is that you make your own house and it has its own feeling to it. Its own themes, I guess. Step 4 is holdings. You buy your holdings with the values you have in the 7 resources. Again, it was a lot of fun going through here. You buy things like castles and troops and so forth. So it was a lot of fun. The 5th step in making your house is the motto and coat of arms. Your motto is your house slogan, like House Stark's "Winter is coming." The coat of arms and heraldry portions are very interesting, but they're also a little confusing, especially for someone who hasn't really dealt with coats of arms or heraldry before. Getting another historical book or perhaps information online about coats of arms and heraldry might be a good idea. You can roll them up randomly or you can pick them. And when I was going through and making my own, I just felt like I needed more information. So, if you don't care about that, that's fine. I just wanted it to mean something and to look cool at the same time. And there's lots of options for you to make cool coats of arms. Step 6 of making your own house is the household. These are the most important family members and other important members of your house. Most of the important members will be the PCs, other than the Lord. At least that's the default assumption, who's going to be an NPC. The various positions are defined and questions are provided to flesh them out more. I would consider these like background questions from other RPGs where you answer things about how you grew up, what your thoughts are, just more things to flesh out your character. Now, that's interesting because we've already talked a lot about ways to make your character interesting and unique, so this is just one more layer. This game seems to be like an onion where there's just more description after more description, which, if you're into that sort of details, is really cool. If you are looking to just have the basics and then move on, your GM might decide to skip some of these steps. So again, depending on what the GM wants to do and what the group wants to do, you can make this game and take it and make it your own. Basically, the different positions are lord, lady, heirs, retainers, servants, household knights, castellan, steward, maester, septon, master of arms, master of horse, master of the hunt, kennel master, vassal knights, and others. The house in action is a section as well. It talks about how every month or at least once every 3 months you have the choice. You get a house fortunes roll, which can be positive and negative, and that's why you have the choice. Do you feel lucky punk is basically the thought that came to my head, where if you're rolling every month, you might get a lot of good stuff, but you might get destroyed too, depending, you might get hit decline, and your house might just get just terrible rolls every month. So it's one of those things, to be careful. Let's see here. If you do not roll your house fortunes roll, so that let's say you only wanted to roll once out of 3 months, you can increase a house resource by 1. This roll is a status test, again emphasizing the status is very important for this game, and that would be the steward. Now this is the one part where I was a little confused. The steward is a position in the house, so I would assume that one of the player characters would be the steward. So if you were making your own house and someone wasn't the steward, they would have to be an NPC, I guess, but that's something to consider when you're making your own house. By adventuring, you can improve your own house's resources, give glory points from adventure, and these can be used to raise house resources as well. The actual actions your house can take are, you can manage your resources, which is basically exchange one resource for another, and there's a ratio for this, so sometimes you might be spending 2 or 3 points in one resource to increase another. And the reason you might want to do this is, like, let's say you chose the north. The north typically has lots of land, but not a lot of the other resources. So you might want to balance things out, or you might say, our law is only 8. We have brigands and criminals running around everywhere, so let's exchange some of this land we have for law. You can begin projects like building castles. You can wage wars, things like skirmishes, battles, border disputes, or full-blown war. You can host tournaments, and there's 3 different types: local, regional, or grand. And you may increase your house's influence with these tournaments. Chapter 7 goes into some of the equipment that you can have. It goes through the various coins of Westeros and the exchange rates between them, and some of them are pretty confusing. This is not the D&D coinage system where 10 of this equals 1 of that, 10 silver equals 1 gold. So you really need to look at it and try to figure out, what's a groat, what's a penny, how does that convert to this, and they have a nice sort of table there that you can figure that all out with. There's a list of equipment and examples of noble garb. Armor and weapons have a price and a weight, but the stats are detailed in another section, that's in the combat section. So it was kind of weird the way they did it. They could have put everything in one section of the book, but I don't know. I really wasn't sure with the whole layout, the reason for this. Because when you're wanting to buy items, you want to see how much damage they do, and just more of the stats for them. So you'll probably find that you're looking at this section and then flipping back to the combat section to see how much damage the weapons do, or how much the armor protects you. There are some nice fluff descriptions of the armor, weapons, horses, etc., and a nice list of nasty poisons, because in Westeros there's lots of poisons that kill people.